Every commercial tomato operation is running 3 habits that never make it onto the back of a seed packet, and skipping all 3 is basically leaving pounds of fruit sitting on the vine before the season even peaks. I'm Grove, and this is Backyard Crops, where we take the exact playbook that greenhouse and field growers use and shrink it down to fit a few raised beds and a patch of backyard dirt. None of what's coming up needs a commercial budget or a decade of experience. It needs about 30 minutes a week, split into 3 habits of roughly 10 minutes apiece, and in exchange you get a plant that keeps producing straight through the heart of the season and holds on longer into the shoulder months when most neighborhood gardens are already winding down. If even one of these 3 ideas is new to you, this is going to change how your plants behave for the rest of the year. And if it's useful, tapping subscribe keeps this channel testing techniques side by side in real soil instead of just repeating gardening folklore. Understanding what your plant is actually doing. Before any of these 3 habits make sense, it helps to know what's happening inside a tomato plant as it grows. A tomato spends its life split between 2 competing jobs. Early on, it's almost entirely focused on building itself, roots reaching down, a sturdy main stem thickening up, leaves unfurling to catch light. Growers call this the vegetative phase. At some point, the plant shifts its attention toward the second job, which is reproduction, flowering, setting fruit, and ripening what it's already carrying. This is the reproductive phase. Here's the catch. A plant doesn't switch cleanly from one mode to the other. It's constantly splitting its energy budget between the 2, and where that split lands determines what kind of season you get. Lean too far vegetative, and you get a lush, leafy plant that barely fruits. Lean too far reproductive, and the plant tries to ripen everything at once, exhausts itself, and shuts down production early. Commercial growers spend their entire season nudging that balance back toward the middle, and that's really what all 3 of the following habits are doing in different ways. Home gardeners tend to just let the plant do whatever it wants, which is part of why a lot of backyard tomato patches produce one big flush and then fizzle. Secret number 1, managing the lower canopy. The first habit is trimming away a handful of the lowest branches on the plant on a rolling basis, a few at a time, once a week or so, rather than all at once. This tends to be the one that makes new gardeners flinch, because it looks like you're taking healthy green growth off a plant that clearly needs its leaves to photosynthesize. Here's the reasoning behind it. Once a tomato plant is loaded with fruit clusters, it doesn't need every single branch it grew earlier in the season to keep feeding those fruits. A mature, indeterminate tomato plant typically only needs a modest number of healthy leaves above each fruit cluster to fund that cluster's growth. Commercial growers generally aim to keep somewhere around 10 to 14 strong branches above the lowest ripening cluster, and not much more than that. Anything beyond that is often just extra vegetative mass competing for the same sugars the fruit needs, plus it's usually the oldest, most shaded, most disease-prone foliage on the plant anyway. So instead of waiting until the whole bottom third of the plant turns yellow and diseased, which is what tends to happen in an untouched garden by August, you get ahead of it. Once your plant has built up more than about 15 mature branches below its topmost flower cluster, start removing a few of the lowest, oldest ones each week. Snip them close to the stem with clean shears rather than tearing them by hand, which can leave a wound that invites disease in through torn tissue. There are 2 payoffs beyond keeping the vegetative reproductive balance in check. The first is airflow. A congested lower canopy sitting close to damp soil is close to a perfect incubator for fungal problems like early blight and Septoria leaf spot, both of which love still, humid air near the ground. Opening that zone up lets air move through and dries the foliage out faster after rain or morning dew. The second payoff is purely practical. It's a lot easier to spot ripening fruit hiding down low when there isn't a wall of leaves in front of it, which matters more than people expect once a plant gets tall and bushy. One thing worth flagging if you're trying this for the first time: don't overcorrect. Stripping a plant bare in one sitting because you got excited about the technique is its own kind of stress. Spread it out, a few branches a week, and let the plant adjust gradually. Think of it less like a haircut and more like ongoing maintenance, a quieter kind of editing, thinning the fruit clusters. The second habit sits right next to the first, and it tends to feel even more counterintuitive, because now you're cutting off fruit itself instead of leaves. When a cluster on your plant is holding 5, 6, sometimes 7 small tomatoes, The instinct is to leave every single one there and hope for a bumper crop. Commercial growers, especially the ones running long seasons in greenhouses, will often trim that same cluster down to 3 or 4 fruits and let the rest go. The logic loops right back to the balance we talked about earlier. A cluster carrying 6 or 7 fruit is asking the plant to mature all of them at roughly the same time, which pulls the plant hard into reproductive mode. It'll pour resources into finishing that fruit, rather than continuing to build new growth and set the next round of flowers. The result, if you've ever grown a tomato plant that produced an enormous first wave of fruit and then seemed to just stop, is exactly this. The plant spent everything it had on that one cluster and didn't have anything left over to keep the cycle going. By trimming a crowded cluster down to a smaller, evenly sized group, you're asking less of the plant at once. It matures those 3 or 4 tomatoes cleanly, generally a bit larger and more uniform than they'd have been in an overcrowded cluster, and it still has enough left in reserve to keep growing and setting new flowers behind it. This matters most if you've got a long growing season ahead of you. If your first frost is coming fast and you're already near the end of the plant's productive window, aggressive fruit thinning isn't worth doing, because you're not trying to stretch out a season you don't have left. But for anyone gardening through a long summer, this is one of the more reliable ways to keep a plant productive from June through the first cool nights of fall, instead of just for a few weeks in July. A practical note on how to do this without damaging the cluster: use scissors or small pruning snips rather than pulling fruit off by hand, and go after the smallest, most delayed tomato on the cluster first, since it's usually the one lagging noticeably behind the others in size. Removing the straggler also tends to clean up the cluster's shape, since it's often the one growing at an odd angle or crowding its neighbors. Secret number 3, what's actually in the water? The third habit doesn't involve pruning shears at all. It's about the water and soil chemistry your plant is pulling its nutrients from, specifically the pH. This is the one home gardeners skip almost universally, mostly because it sounds like a step built for a laboratory rather than a backyard. Tomatoes have a fairly narrow window where they're able to take up nutrients efficiently, generally somewhere between 6 and 6.8 on the pH scale, which puts them just on the acidic side of neutral. Outside that window, particularly once soil or feed water climbs into the high 7s or 8s, something called nutrient lockout starts to happen. The nutrients are technically present in the soil, but the plant can't actually absorb them because the chemical form they're in at that pH isn't accessible to the roots. You can have perfectly fertile soil and still end up with a plant showing signs of deficiency, simply because the pH is blocking the uptake. This is exactly why hydroponic and greenhouse operations treat pH correction as a non-negotiable step. When you're feeding a plant through a controlled nutrient solution instead of soil, there's no buffering to soften a bad pH, so growers test and adjust their feed water constantly, often multiple times a week, to keep it in that narrow acidic band. In native garden soil, there's more natural buffering capacity, so it's less urgent. But if you happen to garden somewhere with naturally alkaline soil or well water in the high 7s or 8s, this step can make a real difference. For a home setup, the easiest entry point is a basic soil pH tester, which will tell you where your starting point actually is, rather than guessing. If your soil or water tests high, there are several ways to bring it down gradually. Elemental sulfur worked into the soil ahead of planting is the slowest but most stable long-term fix. For faster, more targeted adjustment of a watering can or feed solution, small amounts of food-grade citric acid or a diluted acid solution can nudge the pH down before you water. Some gardeners reach for household vinegar as a quick fix, and while it will lower pH in the short term, it isn't a reliable long-term strategy, since repeated use can affect soil structure and beneficial microbial life in ways that are harder to track than a proper soil amendment. The payoff for getting this right shows up gradually rather than overnight. Richer green color in the foliage, steadier fruit set, and fewer of the blotchy yellowing patterns that usually get blamed on pests or disease when the actual cause was locked out nutrients the whole time. It's not the flashiest of the 3 habits, but it's the one that quietly supports everything else you're doing above ground. None of these 3 habits work in isolation from each other, which is really the whole point. Managing the lower canopy and thinning heavy fruit clusters are both about keeping a plant's internal balance between growth and production from tipping too far in either direction, while correcting pH is about making sure the nutrients that balance depends on are actually reaching the plant in the first place. Run one of these habits without the others and you'll see some improvement. Run all three together, even loosely, and the difference compounds. If you're newer to growing tomatoes, don't feel like all three need to start on day one. Pick whichever one matches a problem you've already noticed. If your plants tend to get congested and diseased down low by midsummer, start with canopy management. If you've had that experience of one huge flush of fruit followed by a plant that seems to give up, start with cluster thinning. If your leaves show odd yellowing that never seems tied to watering or pests, start by testing your soil pH. Layer in the other two as you get comfortable, and by the following season, this stops feeling like a technique and starts feeling like just how you grow tomatoes. If any part of this changed how you're thinking about your own plants, dropping a comment about which one you're trying first actually helps other gardeners scrolling through figure out where to start too. And if you want more of this, real techniques pulled from commercial growing and adapted for backyard beds, sticking around on backyard crops means you'll catch the next one as soon as it's out, including a follow-up on the most common mistakes that quietly stall out an otherwise healthy tomato patch partway through the season. Get even one of these three habits into your routine this year, and you'll likely be pulling a heavier, steadier harvest off the same plants you've already got in the ground.